Necro are similar to the undead in many ways. They have a few extra players and they have a few players missing. They are super quick. They are much quicker than the undead. Werewolves are god tier players. They're top three with War Dancers and Gutter Runners. They are really, really good. And as an added bonus, a Necromantic team, when they kill an opponent, if an opponent dies on the field, the Necro player gets a free zombie. He raises the dead player, and they then play for the Necro team, which is kind of cool. I like it. The downsides
With
of
the maybe
Necro,
exception of Stunty, is that what it is?
I think it might be with the exception of stunties. I'm not 100% clear on how that rule works anymore. They changed it a little bit ago. But you could well be right. The weaknesses of a Necro team are their ghouls, wights, and werewolves are pretty much irreplaceable. Ghouls have the same disadvantages for Necro as they do for undead, which is the fact that they don't have regen and they're really, really, really juicy targets. And Necro rerolls are really expensive. This is bad because you don't get any free rerolls as a Necro player, so you could quite easily see your rerolls just going down the drain of trying to pick the ball up. I think Necro are a pretty easy team to get started with, but very hard to actually truly master. Let's have a look at the players on the Necro team. They have some of the more interesting players on any roster. Let's start with the dogs. These werewolves, you can't say too much about them. They are great players. They scale so well. Once they get block and maybe tackle or strip ball, these guys become terrifying. They're movement 8. They're super, super fast. They have claw, which means that they ignore most armor, and they have frenzy. And as I've always said about frenzy, it forces your opponent to play differently, which makes it one of the best skills in the game. Because if they forget about it, you can quickly get a player advantage. It also makes them extremely good at stealing the ball once they've got a couple of skills up. Downsides to werewolves, extremely expensive. They don't start with block, they don't start with dodge. They're quite easy. They're only strength 3, so they're quite easy to knock down, and they're only armor 8, so they're quite easy to hurt. Necro don't have a traditional big guy. They get these guys, the flesh golems, who are strength 4. Super tough, armor 9 guys. They have stand firm. These dudes are some of the most irritating guys in the history of the world. They are so hard to move around because of stand firm. You can knock them down, but they stay where they are. You have to commit so many pieces to knock them down. If they get into your cage, you're in trouble, because you're never going to get them out of there with stand firm.
So, I mean, it's a nice thing too. Like armor value 9, strength 4. It's not too high. Move values pretty low too. But they don't have any they don't have thick skull, or they don't have a loner. They don't have wild animal.
They don't have the bonehead. Yeah, they have no nega traits, which is really good. The downside, of course, is they are only strength 4. So against teams like Khemri or Undead, Necro have such a hard time against Undead because the mummies just beat the flesh golems into the ground and you never get any use out of them. Whites, same as on the Undead team, absolutely identical. Ghouls, identical to Undead ghouls. Zombies, identical to Undead zombies.
But any quick notes on them, just in case they didn't watch the other.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah, so the whites are your blitzers, although in the case of the Necromantic team, you usually use your werewolves as your blitzers, so whites become just like a solid frontliner. Ghouls are your ball carriers and your runners, but again, werewolves can fulfill that role.
So why would you? What's the main point of taking the white again, and the? Like, why would you take a white then?
You take a white because he starts with block, and you need all the block you can get because this is the only skill you really start with, and the same with a ghoul. You start with him because he starts with dodge. and he's movement
So they're
7, so
the
he's slightly
powerful
faster.
frontliners then.
Yeah, and then
The white that is.
the white. The white becomes on an undead team. The white is your mobile piece. He's your blitzer. On a necro team, he's much more of a frontlining tanky guy to try and put in front of the cage.
Hmm.
Your zombies are just your standard trash zombies. Movement 4, strength 3, agility 2. Nothing to write home about. They're trash, expendable. The big difference between an undead team and a necro team is that you can only have 2 ghouls on a necro team. But that's of course because you get 2 werewolves, which the undead team don't get. In my opinion, this is the strongest starting lineup that a necromantic team can field. There are plenty of options. You can go with more ghouls, you can go with 2 werewolves, you can go with less rerolls. I like taking 1 werewolf, 1 ghoul, 2 whites, 2 flesh golems, filling up the rest on zombies and getting 3 rerolls. Because your rerolls, you don't have any. You don't have sure hands, you don't have pass, you don't have catch, you don't have dodge really on anyone apart from a ghoul. So you could very easily find yourself running into a situation where you need that extra reroll. And rerolls are so expensive for the necromantic that you really can't buy them in the middle of the season, because in the middle of the season your reroll price doubles. So when you first buy a reroll, it's 70 grand. When you buy it in the middle of the season, it's 140. Now your first 140,000 is going on your second werewolf. You can't afford to spend that on a reroll because you need the second wolf.
So maybe with the lack of rerolls, would you say it's a difficult team then to play?
It's at the base level, I think it's quite easy, but I think it's hard to find great success with Necro because your positioning has to be perfect. You really have to understand the team to get the most out of it.
Cool.
They struggle against teams with a lot of block. They do quite well in general against immobile, heavily armored teams because the werewolf can just claw through them. They struggle against teams with a lot of strength. They don't like playing against Khemri. They don't like playing against undead too much. Orcs can pose something of a problem. Dwarves and Chaos Dwarves are always an issue for any team that is relying on a player with dodge. Because Chaos Dwarves and Dwarves don't care about your dodge. They'll just tackle you. But at the same time, Necro can outpace nearly every other team in the game.
Okay, that's
with
good.
their werewolves and their ghouls. Early on,
So,
Necro struggles. I don't think they're a particularly good starting team. But once the werewolves have a couple of levels, they become really, really nasty. In a tournament, they stand a reasonably good chance. Because, again, as long as you score a couple of times on your werewolves, and maybe get a lucky injury or something like that, maybe an MVP falls his way, these guys they very quickly snowball into the scariest things that you'll ever see. And that's
excellent.
that's
Yeah,
all I have on Necro. Yeah, I think all around they're a very good team.
good. That's good to hear.